The Racing Post Bloodstock Postcast is sponsored by Racing FX, the UK's leading money services provider to the equine industry.
Hi there and welcome to a special Bloodstock Cheltenham Racing Postcast. I'm Martin Stevens from the Bloodstock desk. I'm here with my colleague James Thomas, and I've also got Brian Mayo, who is the reigning Cheltenham Gold Cup winning breeder, along with his ex-wife Sandra, and he's here to tell us all about how he bred Sizing John, industry issues, and we'll talk a little bit about Cheltenham in a few weeks' time as well. First of all, Brian, can you tell us, how do you breed a Cheltenham Gold Cup winner?
Well, firstly, you need a lot of luck. You have to get the right mare, and then you have to go to the right stallion. You have to hope everything goes right. We bought Peritine years ago from Howard Johnson in the bar at Doncaster Sales. Sandra and I had seen her when she was sold as a 3-year-old. Sandra liked her in particular. We saw her at Howard Johnson's. She went wrong, and Howard one day was in the bar saying, "Do I want to buy this horse?" And it was probably the best buy I've ever made.
And what was the appeal of Lapera? Why did you want her?
She was a very good-looking mare. She was a big mare. She had a lot of quality that you'd hope to pass on to her foals, and she was a good race mare. She was probably a better race mare than she ever showed, because she went wrong in a race when Howard was forced to run her on ground he didn't want to, and so she would have been in the 140s if she hadn't gone wrong.
Right. And I think you've said to me before, the one thing you didn't like so much about her, because of your stats study, says that broodmare sires are very important. You weren't so sure about her sire, who was Northern Crystal.
Yeah, I was lucky. I hadn't done that particular study at the time. If I had, maybe
Right.
I wouldn't have bought
Yeah.
her. So that was a stroke of luck. Yes, that would have been a negative today. I'm very glad it wasn't a negative then.
Yeah.
Broodmare sire is important.
And then you sent Lapera to Midnight Legend, and Midnight Legend we could talk about for hours. But just can you sort of tell us, in a potted history of Midnight Legend, why he was a legend?
Well, he's a horse that really came from nowhere as a jump stallion. He was a good racehorse on the flat, but not a very good one. He was by a decent stallion, night shift, but not an outstanding one. He then went to jump over hurdles, and I believe that David Nicholson, that trained him, wanted to end any possibility of his having a career as a stallion, but Stanley Clark, his owner, stopped him. He was a good hurdler, but probably he won a Grade 1 at Punchystone, but probably his best race was when he was third to Isterbach and French Holly in the entry hurdle. So he was a not quite horse in many ways. He then stood at 2 small studs, Robin and Scarlet Knipes and Liz Harrington's. David and Kathleen Holmes bought him for not very much money. If you buy David a drink or two, he'll probably tell you how much. And he'd covered small books of mares. The mares were not of good quality. But bit by bit, it became apparent that his horses were good ones. And what he was putting into them was determination, guts, and an engine. They tried hard and they stayed on. And in a way, it's kind of an ideal mating to go to Peritine, who was a high-quality mare that wasn't as sound as Midnight Legend, not as tough. You hope to get the best of each. Often you get the worst. We were lucky, we got the best.
And what do you remember of Sizing John as a foal and a young horse? I know possibly Sandra might do.
Sandra would remember a lot more than I would. She tends to. But as a foal, he always had a lot of quality, but he was also very willful. Probably the most memorable thing was after he'd been weaned, he jumped over a stone wall into an area of gorse leading to a quarry. Yeah. He disappeared for an hour. Sandra had to go and get his mother from a nearby field to whinny and call him back, and he eventually jumped back over the wall. So maybe he learned to jump at an early age, but not in the way we intended.
No. It's incredible the twists of fate that these Gold Cup winners and other good horses hang on, isn't it?
Well, there are probably hundreds that could have been that don't get the right breaks.
No, exactly.
We never know about those.
Exactly. And what's Lapera up to now? She's still around, isn't she?
Peritine, I'm pleased to say, is around, yes. She's got a couple of fillies that are due to race in the next year, a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old. She missed a couple of years. She had some problems. They hopefully have been fixed. She's due to foal to Telescope in 3 or 4 weeks, and I'm hoping for another very good horse. Last week, 2 of her daughters had foals by Telescope, both very, very nice, and my partner daughter tells me that one of them, who's a colt, is going to win the Gold Cup in 2025, but he doesn't have a name yet. Right.
And it'll probably be named after a Meatloaf song, is that right?
It probably won't be, but I won't tell you the name in case someone takes it. But the mare's name is Bateau to Hell.
Right.
And,
Very good.
And you're right, the other two are called Dead Ringer for Love and Anything for Love.
Yes.
But a cult won't be called Meatloaf.
No, that would be inauspicious. So Peritine has offspring by Telescope, and Telescope is a stallion you're involved in.
Yeah. I got involved in Telescope. He's the first stallion I ever have been involved in. I got involved in him because Peter and Emma Hocknell at Shade Oak are very good friends of mine. They seem to have less time to watch racing and study bloodstock publications than I do for some unaccountable reason, since all they have to do is run a stud. So for several years I've been trying to spot stallions that might make it at Shade Oak. We had some in mind. Several of them either went wrong or Peter didn't like. I won't tell you, to avoid embarrassing Peter, I won't tell you the one that Peter did let get away. Eventually, I identified Telescope as a dream horse when he won the Vulture Jury. He was a beautiful looking horse with a great pedigree. When he won the Hardwick by 7 lengths, I thought there was no chance of getting him. If he managed to give £15 to De Gruyter in the King George, we would never have got him. In a way, when you're looking for stallions, you're a bit like an ambulance chasing lawyer.
Yeah.
You're looking at horses, waiting for something to go wrong.
Yeah.
I was in Turkey on holiday and I noticed from the internet that Telescope had gone wrong and was for sale as a stallion. I called Peter and suggested that we go and visit Michael Stote and have a look at him. We did that. Peter liked him immediately. I already did. And rather to my surprise, the offer that we made, which was absolutely the top one we could afford, was accepted.
Good. And it's been rewarded, hasn't it? Because he's covered large books for a British jump stallion.
Yeah, he's got off to a really outstanding start. I would have taken significantly less than mares than he's had. He covered 129 in the first year and 167 last year, which is maybe the most or the second most of any British stallion. A lot of those are top quality mares from the TBA Elite Mare Scheme,
Yes.
either good race mares or proven brood mares. And that's going to give him every chance to produce winners in his early crops, which is vital to a stallion.
Yeah. Well, we'll get on to the Elite Mare Scheme later. But do you want to just expand on, because I don't want to embarrass you, but you're probably one of the brainier breeders out there and you put an awful lot of time and effort into statistical study. So can you tell us more about that? What do you look at? What sort of algorithms, if that's what you want to call them?
I better not go through the algorithms, but years ago I trained as a scientist when I was at university, and I did lots of intricate research which was terribly intellectually stimulating but extremely boring into the properties of molecules and why they have certain properties. I do similar amounts of research into the properties of racehorses, which stallions are the best ones and why they're the best ones, which mares are most likely to produce good horses and how they're mated. Essentially, I look at lots of data, which all comes from your website.
Yeah.
So I've looked at the records of almost 1,000 National Hunt stallions, almost 1,000 flat stallions, lots of brood mares, sires, flat and National Hunt, which, by the way, your website continues not to give information about brood mare statistics, and I hope one day it will.
We'll do something about that.
Good. I've also looked at the foals, the over 4,000 National Hunt foals and 12,000 flat foals. And what you're doing simply is looking at the racing ability of the foal as measured by its rating and trying to see which factors in the sire, the dam's ancestors, maybe the dam's age, maybe whether she was barren the year before, any factors you can think of, which factors predict the most likely racing ability of the foal. Now, at the end of all that, you do something called a multivariate regression analysis, which is really least squares fit. It's the best fit to the data you've got. Yeah, of course, yeah. We all know about that. So you come out with figures that predict the most likely racing post rating of the offspring of any mating.
Mm-hmm.
What turns out to be the case is, unsurprising to me, the single most important things are the proven ability of the stallion if he's got runners, or his racing record and pedigree if he's not, the racing record of the mare, her racing ability, or whether she's produced other good horses. The brood mare sire matters. If the grand dam was a decent racehorse and has bred other good racehorses, it helps. But those things are nothing like as important as how good the sire is and how good the dam is.
Right.
At the risk of boring anyone, and this part can be edited out if you like, when you look at lots of matings, you get a distribution curve. I'll do that to the camera.
Yeah.
That's called a Gaussian distribution curve or a normal distribution curve. Basically, you get a few very good horses this way around that end, very good ones. and a few very bad ones, and you get increasing numbers to meet in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as a breeder, there's relatively little you can do on any one mating to decide whether you get a good one or a bad one.
Yeah.
If the horse is raised well and goes to a good trainer, it improves your chances. If you're very lucky by avoiding walking under ladders or not having too many black cats, then the horse has a better chance than if it's very unlucky. But the biggest thing you can't influence is which sperm meets which egg on the hot date. Does it carry the best genes of the stallion, meeting an egg with the best genes of the mare, or the worst? The biggest thing a breeder can do is to make sure that that curve in the middle is the highest possible point. It's the highest racing post rating that you might get.
Yes.
So as an example, if you make average horses, you might get an average rating of just over 90 for a jumper. If you make a good mare to a good stallion, possibly very good, you might get 120. Now, if you mate an average stallion to an average mare, the 90, you have one chance in 10,000, if the horse runs, that it's going to be a good racehorse, a top class racehorse over 170. Sorry, one chance in 1,000, I got the number wrong. With the good ones, you have a better than one chance in 50. So by mating good horses together, your chances of breeding a really top class horse are at least 20 times better.
Yeah.
If you avoid bad luck and you do that often enough, sooner or later you'll breed a good horse.
Yeah.
You need to be very lucky to breed one from bad parents.
There'll be a test on all these figures at the end, won't there?
Yeah, well, so long as we remember it's 1 in 1,000, not 1 in 10,000.
1 in 1,000.
Yeah.
So we'll also get onto that later because we're going to talk about your work on industry issues, that point about how you need to really learn how good your mare is you're going to mate, and you can only do that by racing them.
Yeah.
But just before we get onto that, I wanted to make a point about British breeders. You're part of would it be fair to say a new wave of British breeding success? Because you've had Thistlecrack, we've had Q Card, Sizing John, Special Tiara, Rule the World, now Ed Wolf,
Yanworth not long ago.
Coneygree, you know what I mean, Harry?
Yeah.
It seems, I haven't done the stats, but it seems that there's more British bred jumps grade 1 winners now than there has been for a long time. Is that by coincidence or?
I've not done the stats, but I don't think it is by coincidence. If you look at all the horses you've mentioned, with I think one exception, maybe you didn't mention Special Tiara, all of those were bred from horses that were proven as national hunt race mares. They all won and they weren't top class necessarily, but they were good race mares.
Yeah.
I think that British breeders potentially are more likely to use mares that have proved they can do something. Perhaps they race them themselves. Typically, those horses have been produced by good stallions over at least 1.5 miles. Mm-hmm. It may just be that the average British breeder is more concentrating on trying to breed a good horse than to produce a horse that's going to be fashionable at the sales in 6 months' time or a year's time.
Yeah.
So it may be that the statistics would show that our success rate in producing winners is higher, and if you produce more winners, you're going to produce more good winners, and I think that's one of the factors.
And I guess we're lucky that we have quite a good band of jump stallions in Britain at the moment, led by Cave Tara, is that fair to say?
I don't know if it's luck. We'll talk more about the elite mare scheme. I think there's a certain amount of action that's made that happen. The jump stallions at the moment, it's a little bit more difficult than it used to be. There was a golden generation almost, of which Cave Tower and Shantou and Flemmersworth are about the only ones left. You know, the likes of King's Theatre, Vic, Oscar, Beneficial have gone. I think that what's happening is that the newer jump stallions are better than they used to be. Cave Tower is a very good example of an excellent jump stallion. Midnight Legend made it from nowhere. I think the ones that we're getting now, in particular Telescope, Dartmouth and Jack Hobbs, show a lot of promise. And Black Sam Bellamy and Scorpion are also very promising horses.
And one last part for this section before we get on to more gritty industry issues, and going back to the statistical study, I don't want you to give away your competitive edge, but can you give us around
It's prayer, Martin.
Prayer, sorry,
prayer.
that's what it is.
Prayer and good living.
Exactly, yeah. Can you give us 2 or 3 stallions who your statistical studies say are probably better than they might get credit for, or we think?
I think it's difficult to see them at the moment, because when you're trying to assess national hunt stallions, you've got to wait until their oldest runners are at least 5, and that tells you a little bit. Then you look at them again when they're 6 and again when they're 7, and you have to compare them with other stallions at the same stage of their careers. A couple of years ago, it became obvious to me that Yates was a very good stallion, and I think he's completely underrated. He covered less than 100 mares last year. I don't know the reasons, but I'm sure he's underrated. When I did the figures last year on Irish stallions, they showed that Soldier of Fortune was also potentially a very good stallion, but 300 and odd Irish breeders seem to realise that and used him last year. Getaway and Marley and Island showed promise, but only promise. In England, Black Sam Bellamy and Scorpion are the best of the ones with runners under 10.
Yeah.
But there are no magic bullets, so I wouldn't be giving away any secrets.
Fair enough. But Yates is an interesting angle because
Yates is, to me, the one that's most underrated.
James, anything you want to ask in this section about how Sizing John was bred and the statistical side of things?
Well, the only thing I was going to ask you is, obviously you mentioned the likes of Telescope. Do you think that's the on the flat everyone's after precocity, speed? Do you think the kind of unintended consequence of that is that jumps breeders are now getting into higher class horses kind of earlier in their stud career than they were perhaps 10 or 15 years ago?
I think that's absolutely certain. Long time ago, which I can remember, you guys being very youthful can't, horses like Telescope would have gone to stud as flat stallions for years. Now you get Derby winners going to National Hunt studs very early. You get a horse like Workforce that went to Japan and very quickly is whipped to a National Hunt stud in Ireland. The quality of National Hunt stallions, I am sure, is very much higher than it was. The best National Hunt stallions, and I've done a lot of work on this, tend to be bested 1.25 miles at least and 1.5 miles ideally. They tend to be very good size themselves, and they tend to be very good racehorses. Several years ago, horses like that would have gone straight to flat studs and you wouldn't have a chance. That's why people like me are ambulance chasers looking at middle distance races, hoping to see a horse that doesn't quite win the King George, but nearly does, and then is ready for a National Hunt stud. I think the quality of National Hunt horses now is much higher than it was.
Good, so we'll get back onto more industry issues in the next part.
The Racing Post Bloodstock Postcast is sponsored by Racing FX, the UK's leading money services provider to the equine industry. Manage all your multi-currency needs in one cash manager account and spend anywhere in the world using the Racing FX multi-currency card sponsored by MasterCard. Payments to all service providers in the industry, at home or abroad, are quick and easy to manage via our unique equine network.
Hi there, we're back on this special Bloodstock Cheltenham postcast sponsored by Racing FX. I'm Martin Stevens from the Bloodstock desk. My colleague James Thomas is still here, and we have the breeder of last year's Cheltenham Gold Cup winner, Sizing John, Brian Mayo. Brian also does a lot of work for the TBA, the British TBA, on jumps issues. And they're quite topical at the moment, I guess, because people... there's some anxiety, I think it's fair to say, about the increase in mares races, and that's Brian's responsibility. So
we're going to a certain amount of effort to get more mares races.
Exactly, he's the culprit. So we're going to grill him on that and why he does it, and so there's lots of anxiety out there. People worry about the dilution in top races because some of the top mares are now diverted to these other races at Cheltenham and elsewhere in the season. Why have we done it?
Well, the anxiety is definitely not felt by breeders. If you're a breeder of a National Hunt horse, you have one major problem. 50% of the horses you produce are mares. Only 20% of the horses in training in this country are fillies. When you try to sell a filly, you're going to hit a serious problem. If you sell a well-bred filly, you'll be lucky to get half the price of a similarly bred colt. If it's not so well-bred, you'll be lucky to get a quarter. Now that makes for an economic disaster for breeders. The only solution to that is to encourage more trainers and owners to buy fillies and to race them until you get a much more similar situation that exists on the flat, that far more fillies are put into training. So the first thing that mares races do is to make it more possible for people to breed horses, which is surely a good thing. The second thing they do is, for the reason I've said earlier, the best race mares, statistically, are most likely to be the best brood mares.
Exactly, yeah.
So that the more mares you test, the better the quality of the brood mare band should be. And it should allow British mares in particular, if you encourage those, to compete more effectively with the Irish and French. So it's a win-win for everyone. Ultimately, you'll get a more competitive racing programme because there are more good horses racing against each other. Sooner or later, these extra mares will produce one that wins a Cheltenham Gold Cup. There's no reason why we can't produce another Dawn Run as well as another Annie Power.
Yeah. So playing devil's advocate, there'd be people who are looking at Cheltenham in a few weeks' time and saying, we want to see Apple's Jade take on Super Sunday in the World Hurdle, or the Stayers Hurdle now, or we want to see her take on Bouvet Dare in the Champion Hurdle, but she's not. She's going to go to what could potentially be an uncompetitive Mares Hurdle, although we were saying earlier that last year's was actually a real cracker of a race. But
Yeah.
what, as you'd be a racing fan as well, does that? What would you think about that?
It doesn't worry me. The Apple's Jade, the decision is being taken by Michael O'Leary. He pays the bills, he's entitled to take the decision. The race she's going for is the Mares Champion Hurdle in effect. You have to be a very good mare to win it. If she happens to be several lengths better than the other mares in the race, well, that's no different than Arkle being several lengths better than the horse in the Cheltenham Gold Cup in his time. I think that in some ways, mares races in National Hunt are the last bastion of the male chauvinist. You get a lot of pretty ill-informed people going on and on about these mares races are terrible, blah, 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 blah. None of them are breeders. I suspect that they know very little about breeding, and it just gives them a chance to sound off. When you have a horse running on the flat, a filly, a good filly, you don't hear people saying, oh, why isn't she running in the Derby instead of the Oaks? Years ago, when the flat programme was improved and more grade ones were put on for fillies and mares, people said that will dilute the programme, the same argument. Well, it didn't dilute the programme, more of them stayed in training for longer. And it's since that you had Trev become the first horse since 1978 to win 2 Arcs. And last year, Enable won the King George and the Arc. On the flat, the programme for mares or fillies has encouraged more to race for longer, and they're still succeeding against the Colts and Geldings. The same would happen for jumps.
Yeah, well, I think that's put the naysayers in their place. Have you any last remaining arguments against mares races?
Really, pretty indisputable, that, isn't it, really?
No.
I mean, I suppose...
Well, I think it is, but I'm sure Tony McCoy and Harvey Smith might dispute it.
I suppose the thing is, given that these schemes and the initiatives are sort of a relatively new thing, what would you like the landscape of national hunt breeding on racing to look like in kind of 20 years' time? Off the back of these races.
I'd like more of the horses racing to be bred in this country. I'd like the mares programme to be even more competitive, with perhaps 40 black type races instead of the 32 we have now, but all very competitive, producing large fields. 30% of the horses at least to be mares. You're never going to get 50 because some of them are going to retire to stud. And I'd like some of them to come through and win the Gold Cup and the Champion Hurdle. And I think it will happen.
So going on to other industry issues, and perhaps ones which are more insular to breeders, which racegoers might not be affected quite so much by. We have the NH MOPS, which is one of your initiatives, and the Elite Mares Scheme. How are they going? And then, again, there are some sort of naysayers within the industry who want their breeders' prizes back. What would you say to them?
Well, NHMOP stands for the National Hunt Mare Owners Prize Scheme, and basically it provides serious prizes, 5,000 in bumpers, £10,000 in novice in some hurdle races, to the owners and connections of British-bred mares that win those races. Now, the point of that is to encourage a stronger British breeding industry. Right now, we produce less than a quarter of the horses that race in National Hunt in this country. I think that's a dangerous situation for reasons that we might talk about later, but if you want to produce more, then it needs to be more practical for breeders to sell their fillies for good prices and perhaps to encourage them to race them themselves. MOPS does that. Trainers who didn't used to train mares are now training several. Trainers that used to train some are training more. They can say to the owner, look at this is a great deal. You can win £10,000 for winning a Class 4 novice hurdle, and you can. And it's not impossible to do it by a long way. There are a lot of those prizes. So it's starting to change the culture. And if it changes the culture, it will encourage more mares to be raced, and it's got to be a good thing for British breeders. The Elite Mare Scheme is aimed at helping us stand better stallions in this country. It provides vouchers for the best race mares and the best proven brood mares that live in this country to visit British stallions. So it provides a very significant discount from the stud fee, in many cases a free stud fee. Without that, lots of them would go to Ireland and France. With that, it means that we have the opportunity to stand better stallions here. When we bought Telescope, that was a big factor in the economics. Simon Sweeting, recently talking about Jack Hobbs, said it was the tilting factor that we had the elite mare scheme, that he got Jack Hobbs rather than him going to Ireland.
So all those veteran jumps breeders who have over decades received their checks in the post after they've bred a decent winner and would now be moaning about it, you'd say to them more or less, shut up, it's for the good of the...
I'm kind of one of them, because I didn't get a Breeders' Prize for Sizing John along with Sandra last year, and I've not yet won a MOPS race, so I'm not speaking out of my pocket. Basically, there's a limited amount of money in this industry. We all know that. Owners get a very poor reward. They get a worse reward in National Hunt than they do with the flat. So when you're taking that money, you have to use it for purposes that are going to help the industry. Now, it'd be very nice to have a Breeders' Prize for a horse you bred several years ago. I think it is far more use to breeders to encourage them to use stallions and have better stallions standing here, and encourage them to race their mares and get them better prizes for the mares that they have now, or fillies they have now, rather than reward them for something they did years and years ago, and some of them aren't even breeders anymore. Yeah. So yes, love to have it, don't see how it can happen.
No. And then finally in this industry section, we're just going to talk about the fact that British breeding is so small. Does it matter? Because is that not just a case of market forces and that's where we are, and there aren't copious amounts of owners out there to buy the horses anyway?
Well, it's not a problem with the owners, because the owners buy the horses, and a lot of them are born in France and Ireland. So although, of course, we want more owners more horses racing.
So you want the proportion of the horses who
are there?
We
want a much bigger proportion to be British. As I said, less than a quarter of the horses racing are British on the jumps, and it's about half on the flat. Now, whether that's a problem, a couple of things. Firstly, if you think that it's a healthy thing for an industry that underpins the sport we all love and that generates hundreds of millions of pounds of economic activity, to be highly dependent on horses bred in Ireland and France, if you think that's a good thing and it's not a problem, fine. I think it's a problem, particularly with Brexit coming up. The second thing is that a lot of breeders are owner breeders, and they have friends that get involved in horses, and those friends go on to be owners. If you have less breeders in this country, you will have less owners. If you have less owners, you will have less horses in training. You will have less competitive racing. So yes, it is a serious problem that British breeding is weaker than Irish and French, and it's about time that we took action, aggressive action, to do something about it.
So the overarching issue in the industry at the moment is Brexit. No one seems to quite know what's going on, and it's a terribly thorny issue. What does it mean for British jumps breeding?
Well, Brexit, no one knows what it means for anything very much. I think personally that there are threats to the change to the status quo, and there are opportunities dependent on how clever people are in terms of looking at the new way of the world, and that applies to jumps breeding as well. From a breeding point of view, Brexit is going to mean, in its present form, that it's going to be more difficult to move horses unless we can negotiate free movement that exists in the tripartite agreement. There could well be changes to the taxes and tariffs on buying and selling horses, both for breeding and racing. For jumps breeding in particular, there's an interesting situation in that if we have to fall back on WTO rules, World Trade Organization rules, there is no tariff for movements of breeding stock, but there is an 11% tariff for movements of horses that aren't breeding stock, which basically means geldings. Now, we import a lot more geldings from Ireland than we send to Ireland. So as a British breeder, I've got to say I'm not lying awake at night worrying about the 11% tariff applied to geldings moving between the countries. But it could be a big issue. The answer to it, I think, is that we have to be much more proactive as a British industry, and the TBA in particular. I think we need to look seriously at a premium scheme for British breds, flat and jumps, colts and fillies alike, somewhat similar to the French scheme, and give extra rewards for British breds in this country, generated by taxpayers' money. Generated by taxation that has come from betting on British races, and I think that's a major issue for the TBA in the next few years.
So that's your next mission.
Yeah.
In the next section, we're going to come back and we're going to be talking about Cheltenham in a few weeks' time.
The Racing Post Bloodstock Postcast is sponsored by Racing FX, the UK's leading money services provider to the equine industry. Manage all your multi-currency needs in one cash manager account and spend anywhere in the world using the Racing FX multi-currency card, sponsored by MasterCard. Payments to all service providers in the industry, at home or abroad, are quick and easy to manage via our unique equine network.
Okay, so we're back on this Bloodstock Cheltenham Postcast sponsored by Racing FX. Martin Stevens, I'm still here. James Thomas is still here. And Sizing John's breeder, co-breeder, Brian Mayo is still here. So I thought now we might just talk about Cheltenham coming up in a few weeks' time. And going back to Sizing John, is it a case of how many lengths he wins by, or are you optimistic, pessimistic, or...?
Well, when Sizing John won the Gold Cup last year, it was a dream come true, at least a daydream come true. Things like that don't happen very often. No British-bred horse has ever won 2 Cheltenham Gold Cups. The last one to retain the title was 15 years ago, and Sizing John didn't run very well at Leopardstown. If he's in the same form as last year, and he's a year stronger, then I think he will take a lot of beating. But
I think Jessica Harrington was quite frank, wasn't she, that she'd made a mistake in December about running.
Yeah, but he ran very badly. I mean, if he were a little bit weary from the race before, I don't know if he run that badly. Perhaps there are other issues. Hopefully they've been cleared. Unfortunately, John's not picked up the phone to tell me what the problem was and that he's feeling better. So we won't know until the day of the Cheltenham Gold Cup whether he's in the same form.
No.
I'd be delighted with a 5-length win. I'd take 2 lengths. I'd accept a nose. Except in that case, I'd probably be dead before the announcement.
Yeah, that would be hairy. James, can Sizing John retain the Gold Cup?
I don't see why not. I mean, it looks a very open renewal, doesn't it? I mean, you know, I think in any race where there's no standout, you wouldn't discount anything. But I appreciate what you say. You know, he has got to bounce back from a pretty below par effort, and that's not really the ideal preparation, is it? No.
It wasn't ideal.
No.
So who do you think the biggest dangers are to Sizing John?
Might Bite and Native River are the obvious dangers. Slightly nervous about Total Recall, but basically anything in that race could win. It's an open race.
Yeah, it's very
the biggest danger to Sizing John is, does he turn up in the same form he was in last year?
Yeah.
Who would you fancy to give Sizing John a race?
Well, I did my research last night, and I wouldn't know Jump's form inside out, but I liked the fact I was doing my pedigree research, and if Road to Respect goes there, he has the pedigree because he's out of a half sister or.
Road to Riches.
Yeah, I was getting there. I just couldn't remember the relation. But yeah, Road to Riches, who was third to Coneygree, wasn't he? So I liked that. Yeah, exactly. Gamut.
I'd be surprised if he's got the brilliance.
Yeah, there's quite a few in there who haven't actually displayed their brilliance yet, have they? Like Total Recall is obviously very unexposed.
Yeah, he might be very good. Native River is clearly a good, tough horse that stays. Might Bite can be brilliant on his day, although I wasn't particularly impressed with him in the King George. Sizing John, I think, was a very good horse last year, but not a great horse. There are no great horses in this year's race.
No, and similarly with Al Duke, who's a talking horse now. He hasn't got Stardust yet, has he?
No, and I don't think he's quite as good a jumper, and I'm delighted if Robbie Parr rides Sizing John.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Robbie Parr is a brilliant jockey at presenting a horse to a fence.
Yeah. Now, I know you're not a massive punter, but do you have any other...
I'm not a punter at all.
Sorry.
I gamble enough money buying broodmares and breeding horses.
But are there any horses that are catching your eye for Cheltenham from a breeding point of view? That?
Well, breeders are biased, so I'll be biased towards Sam Spinner in the Stayers Hurdle because his sire Black Sam Bellamy stands at Shade Oak and is in the next box to Telescope. If Sizing John weren't running in the Gold Cup, I'd be biased to Might Bite for the same reason. I'd like Kalishnikov to win because Paul Murphy is a friend of mine, and I think Amy Murphy is a very promising young trainer.
Yeah.
Sam Crow is a very impressive looking horse, but then so was Denman at the same stage, and he lost in that race.
Yes, of course, yeah.
I don't think Sam Crow will lose, but we'll see. Footpad is very interesting in breeding terms. He looks a brilliant horse over fences, better than he was over hurdles. He's inbred 2x3 to Sadler's Wells, just like Enable was. Mm-hmm. So if he wins the Arkle in no time at all, there'll be breeding pundits saying this is a marvellous way to breed good horses, inbreed 2x3 to Sadler's Wells.
It'll become the thing.
Unfortunately, I've done the stats and it's statistically not a good idea, but you can get lucky. Yeah. And those 2 horses did. Yeah.
Any pedigree punts for Cheltenham?
I mean, they're not exactly working men's prices, but the 2 that look interesting are the 2 fillies by Saddler Maker.
Yeah, he could be the stallion of the meeting. I mean, Apple's Jade and Apple Shakira both look like they'll win their races, in my opinion. Bristol de May's not there, but he's a good horse. Saddler Maker would have been another midnight legend from France. Yeah. He was seriously making it, and he died. The other horse I'll be watching with a lot of interest is Black Corton, because 18 months ago, I bought a mare who's half sister to his dam.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, he was he was a novice hurdler at the time.
Yeah.
When he won a black type race, I was delighted.
Yeah.
When he started running over fences, I was more delighted, and I was euphoric when he won the Koto Star at Kempton. And I love the way Bryony Frost rides him, so he's one I'll support. But breeders are very bad pundits because they're too biased.
No, exactly. And he's a bad pundit because he just is.
Very kind of you. Oh, what's the Stevens nap based on pedigree alone?
I won't go for Nat, but I'll go for an up and coming sire for Cheltenham, who is Great Pretender, who has lots of horses at shortish odds for Cheltenham. He stood in Britain for 1 or 2 years?
I think it was 1 year. I've got to say that with a horse at a rival stud, I'm delighted that he doesn't stand at the same stud these days,
no, exactly.
because he's proved himself a good
popular,
stallion, and he would be very popular rightly.
Of course, by King's Theatre, who's just littered Cheltenham winners over the years, hasn't he? So.
Well, he's had a few. I wouldn't say littered. King's Theatre was the best jump stallion in my stats, but Great Pretender was a pretty good horse too, and clearly a good stallion.
Very good.
The other interesting one will be Getaway. This could be a big Cheltenham for
has
Getaway.
Get a Bird, and he has about 3 or 4
He's got, I think, 4 in the bumper, and 3 of them are amongst the favourites. He's been very highly hyped in Ireland with point-to-point winners and bumper winners and hurdles winners. But the fashion can change overnight. If 2 of them come in, then he's the next great hero.
Yeah, exactly.
If none of them come in, oh well, where's the next one?
He'll sink, yeah.
So it's a very, very tough world for stallions. You know, they've got to make it by being good racehorses, and then it's immensely competitive when they go to stud.
Yeah, exactly. Fine. Okay, so I think that's the industry sorted, and how Size and John was bred, and a few horses to follow at Cheltenham. So thank you very much for watching the Postcast, and we'll be back again soon with more thoughts. Thank you.
The Racing Post Bloodstock Postcast is sponsored by Racing FX, the UK's leading money services provider to the equine industry. Manage all your multi-currency needs in one cash manager account and spend anywhere in the world using the Racing FX multi-currency card sponsored by MasterCard. Payments to all service providers in the industry, at home or abroad, are quick and easy to manage via our unique equine network.